It is October 13th, 1972. A Uruguayan rugby team is on board a plane flying through the air. The pilot announces over the intercom that they need to pass through some air pockets. It's natural, so there's no need to worry. The plane takes off from the capital of Uruguay, Montevideo, and is heading to Santiago, the capital of Chile. Dr. Roberto Canessa, a member of the Uruguayan rugby team, asks one of his teammates why the plane is flying so close to the mountains. Just a few seconds after his question, the plane gets dangerously close to the mountain, hitting it and breaking apart. It crashes on the slopes of that mountain. Dr. Canessa, who later wrote a book about this incident, describes how he hit his head hard against the seat in front of him and became disoriented. In his writings, he mentions that he thought he had died. Then, amidst the screams and cries of the other passengers, Roberto regains some consciousness and realizes the magnitude of the tragedy. He sees one of his teammates bleeding from his eyes while others have broken limbs or bodies. They are all groaning, and they recognize the Andes mountain range, the longest mountain range in the world, forming the border with Chile. Unfortunately, the plane had crashed in this very mountain range. They find themselves in an area where snow covers the ground, and heavy snowfall continues. The passengers, with their damaged doors, can smell the airplane's fuel and decide to get out because the risk of a fire is high. They start walking on foot. They bring their bags and use them to create a large cross on the snow, hoping that someone who comes to help will find them. They also carve a large SOS in the snow, which means help. But the heavy snowfall keeps covering it every moment. 2 days pass, and despite all the misfortunes, they endure. During these 2 days, 2 planes fly above them, but they are not spotted. These planes carried a total of 45 passengers, 12 of whom were killed instantly, 5 died a few hours later due to bleeding, and 28 are currently alive. No one finds them, and 2 weeks pass until they reach the 17th day. They are in the mountain range now, a mountain covered with millions of tons of snow, where a massive snow avalanche descends from the mountain and takes 9 of them away. They had eaten whatever they had in the plane, with only a small amount left. The plane crashed at an altitude of 3,600 meters, where it was bitterly cold. Until that day, they didn't have any food problems, but the cold was tormenting them. They didn't have a water problem because they were eating snow, but their food was running out, and the cold was intensifying. That's why they start tearing off pieces of the plane's fuselage and creating a shelter for themselves. The brightness of the snow was blinding their eyes, so they tore apart the leather seats of the plane and made blindfolds for themselves. They used metals they could break from the plane and kept them straight to support those with broken limbs so that they wouldn't worsen. Roberto Canessa, whom we mentioned earlier, was a doctor. So he tried his best to help everyone. He even placed the bodies killed by the snow avalanche under the snow so that they would at least remain preserved if they were rescued, Roberto. In his book, Roberto wrote that I traveled with a group of young people who were intelligent and had increased their intelligence because they wanted to survive. 17 days have passed since the crash, and the food has completely run out. The altitude is so high that there are no animals to hunt and eat. They all knew that there were some bodies buried under the snow. They endured hunger for a while, but eventually, they chose a solution that we all know. Most of the airplane passengers were Christians, and they considered this act to be very wrong. However, it has been said since ancient times that hunger does not recognize religion and faith. Roberto Canessa. He was a doctor who was familiar with the human body and knew his duty to guide everyone on which parts of the bodies they should eat to have nutrition. Roberto says it was a very difficult task because we knew all these bodies, and we had been friends with them for years. Now we had to eat their bodies. One of the survivors was named Coche Inciarte, and he couldn't eat at all. He said, "I can't put this meat in my mouth." No one insisted on him, but after a few hours, he was also forced to eat. They all decided to nourish themselves from the bodies, but there were also 3 bodies of children on the plane, and they said, "We won't touch them because they are the children of the players and team members." Roberto was a very strong person. He transferred this strength to everyone and encouraged them, saying, "Eat, don't be upset. If I were the one who had died and my friends were hungry, I would tell them to eat my body. All the survivors said that if it weren't for Roberto, we would have all died in those early days. Roberto gave us strength, solutions, and he was also our doctor, helping everyone. They had been trying to use the plane's radio throughout this time, attempting to connect with someone. But a month had passed, and no one responded to their messages. They finally realized that it seemed like no one was going to come to their rescue, so they decided to take matters into their own hands. 3 of them made snowshoes with airplane parts and put them on to climb up the mountain, hoping to see where they were from above. When they reached the top, they were terrified. They saw that they were right in the middle of the mountain range, and no matter which way they looked, it was all mountains. They said, "Well, in the end, we will find a way and go downhill." 2 of them started descending, and after 10 days of descent, they finally reached a place where there was less snow and the ground was almost green with a flowing spring. Seeing this spring in the green land gave them hope, and they continued. They traveled another 70 kilometers on foot until they finally reached something. It turned out to be a village. They entered the village and told the villagers that they needed to contact the city. In short, they established contact and informed the government of their survival. After 70 days since the plane crash, the Chilean government sends 2 helicopters and finds them. They rescue 16 survivors while a total of 29 people had died. The news coverage and newspapers sensationalized the rescue to the extent that the survivors felt ashamed to admit that they were among the passengers. Everywhere people were saying that the cannibals had arrived, and the Chilean government saved the cannibals, which was considered a terrible thing for religious Christians. They believed that anyone who engaged in cannibalism should be killed. Finally, they returned to Uruguay, and the church there forgives them. After being forgiven by the church, they are less harassed in Uruguay, and they are no longer called devils. Even the families of the deceased who were eaten forgive them and somehow understood that they were not at fault. However, in general, Christianity does not forgive them. If the church in Uruguay forgave them, it was only within Uruguay and not elsewhere.